Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar. Today, we'll be discussing self-filing with SAP Global Trade Services. We're joined today by William Lee, the IT Director at CareFusion, now a BD company, and Michael Bendalian, the SAP GTS Product Manager at SAP. I'll let them introduce themselves, but for right now, I'd just like to go over some quick housekeeping on the next slide. And on the next slide, here, you'll see the GoToWebinar questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. If you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the questions box, and we'll address any of the questions that you have following the webinar. Now on the next slide, I'd like to quickly just introduce Krypt. Krypt Inc. is a leading SAP Global Trade and Supply Chain Consulting partner. We provide services such as implementations, upgrades, and customizations around various SAP solutions, including GTS, EWM, TM, GRC, and HANA. We do have over 350,000 hours of SAP consulting, and we offer custom solutions, integration services, and we work closely with SAP for ramp-ups and testing. Now I'll hand it over to William Lee from CareFusion, who will be walking us through importing at CareFusion and how self-filing with SAP GTS worked for them.
Thanks a lot, Kayleen, and a pleasure to be able to speak with you guys today. So CareFusion was a company, a medical device company that was a spin-off of Cardinal Health out of Columbus, Ohio, out of Dublin, Ohio. And we recently, about a year ago, got acquired by Becton Dickinson. But a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is really a journey of a spin-off from Cardinal Health and what we needed to do to bring about our own global trade capabilities as part of exiting service agreements with Cardinal Health. So, at a high level, CareFusion was launched in September of 2009. We had many service agreements that we had to separate from Cardinal Health. So we had about a 3-year period where we had to stand up our own HR systems, our own financial systems, or a global trade solution. So from an IT perspective, we were a $4 company that had to stand up its own capabilities in many areas, of which global trade was one. And I can tell you from a prioritization standpoint, obviously being able to move goods across borders is very critical, but from a timing perspective, this project kind of got pushed towards the end of the service agreements, which meant there was no room for failure, right? So we started in March of 2012, and we basically had a little less than a year to stand up global trade, so that we could exit our service agreement with Cardinal Health and stand on our own, right? So again, a very short time frame, a time-based project, right? One where we had to hit a particular date, otherwise we wouldn't have services. And in the June and July time frame, we did choose Krypt as an integration partner. We had started some blueprinting activities earlier with some other partners. I'll talk a little bit about that later in regards to kind of lessons learned and kind of success fit factors in implementing GTS. But in any case, our journey started in June and July with Krypt, both for worldwide exports and later on when we implemented U.S. imports in August. I'm showing two time frames here, but I can tell you we worked in parallel, even though we had two go live dates. So we had a hard go live date for worldwide exports, and another go live date for U.S. imports, but those efforts were working in parallel. And again, you know, CareFusion was acquired by Becton Dickinson back in March of 2015, and a lot of what we set up will probably change, given that the fact that Becton Dickinson has their own global trade landscape. But I'll also point out that it is an SAP GTS solution. So describing kind of what the global trade footprint looked like at CareFusion, right? A pretty sizable footprint, right? $2 billion in imports per year, 25,000 transactions, imports in 10 countries. We were already self-filing in 3 other countries. So what's a little bit interesting about this, again, is a time-dated project that was related to getting out of a service agreement, but we were coming from a situation with Cardinal Health where we had automation already in place. The automation that we had in place, though, wasn't in a single tool. I'll get to that. There was a multiple of tools in the landscape, but this wasn't a situation where a company went from having manual processes to having automated processes, and it isn't a situation where we went from not self-filing to self-filing. So a lot of time pressure to build capabilities that already existed, but on a single platform. So again, some of our profile that might be similar or different than the companies that are on the call today. But again, we've self-filed customs and entries in 85% of our transactions. And we had an SAP self-filing model in Europe that was already in place, so it's something that we had to replicate. And from a regulatory perspective, some of the major regulatory compliance hurdles CareFusion has to follow as a med device company is that 95% of our imports are FDA regulated, and we had to also meet regulations as it related to FDA kit. So the objectives, you know, of our project, kind of like Mission Impossible within a short time frame, was to replicate or build what we had in place with Cardinal Health, but on SAP GTS. We had 3 instances of SAP. We had regulatory and master data in CareFusion kind of spread all over the place, right? You know, from, you know, napkins to access databases to Excel spreadsheets. But that's one thing I'll talk about as a major hurdle in regards to master data harmonization, and data cleansing becomes a major issue when you automate things to the extent that we automated them. But our goal really was to have a single tool where we would have visibility across our supply chain, and that tool, you know, that we chose was SAP GTS, right? And again, in the past, we were an SAP shop, but we, for global trade, used Vastera for exports, MIC for European imports, and a software called Krypt for U.S. imports, right? And each of those things had their own silos, and there were interfaces into SAP, but we certainly did not have a single view of our supply chain and of those transactions, and we certainly didn't use the power of what the data we already had inside of SAP to help move those transactions through. So again, our U.S. import objectives were to continue our SASP model, support electronic filing for imports, ISF filings, cargo release, electronic invoice for remote filing, brokers' instructions for entities where we didn't self-file, and this was a real big support for FDA and other government agencies as it related to filings and FDA kits, which we struggled with mightily, prior to this project. So I spoke a little bit earlier about what our landscape looked like before GTS, right? So a different system for European imports, a different system for U.S. imports, and our export system was TradeSphere or Vastera, kind of connecting into SAP. I wouldn't say we used any of the MDM inside of SAP. Most of these systems had their own mechanism for bringing in master data, but it was highly manual and suspect, right? A lot of capabilities to override master data and data data values. So where we were automated and where we had self-filing, it wasn't the case that we let master data flow through SAP. And here you can see, the fact that our landscape with GTS is highly simplified, right? So now one system for imports and exports with master data, emanating from SAP, very little intervention from folks having to correct data, and if data needs to be corrected, it's corrected through master data from its source. The one system that's outside of that SAP landscape for Maquiadora that's still in place is Millennium. So again, a lot of what I'm talking about is going from a bunch of different point solutions to a single view, which is the very reason we chose SAP GTS, right? The one system where you could have an integrated view of your whole supply chain, and also use and leverage the data that's already in our SAP system from a SD perspective and from a material master perspective. So very, very powerful, very scalable, again, for any future needs or future changes. And we did pretty, strenuous RFPs both on the product side and on the implementation side, and looked at all the other options out there, both cloud and non-cloud, and point solution and non-point solution. And SAP GTS was a pretty easy choice for us because it was the only one, best-in-class tool that allowed us to have an integrated view of our supply chain. Why self-file? It's an interesting topic, but at the end of the day, all the data elements that you have to self-file are contained within GTS. So, the choice is really around whether you send those electronic messages to brokers for them to file, or whether you do it directly with the agencies. And I think every company has their own, view and business case around why self-file or not. But I can tell you from a transactional standpoint, all the messaging and the transactions are there to self-file, and then the question gets to be, what other services do brokers offer outside of the filing itself, because you have the data that you need to self-file and SAP allows for that messaging to push to the authorities for you to be able to self-file. So a little bit about the solution, right? And this is probably an area where, you know, I'm probably weakest, being that I haven't been involved in this area for a while. So this is kind of looking back at another time in my life. I currently am a director inside of Beck & Dickinson, and mostly I support R&D and PLM efforts. So I think at one point I was a savant in our own particular solution, but now it's a vague dream, right? So I'll go through the key features, but I know at the end of the day, if you have questions, I know Rajan's on the phone, and we can get into particulars in regards to your solutions or this solution offline. So we again leveraged inbound delivery and basic SAP functionality for us to perform our filings. We were able to self-file both on the kit side and the FDA side. I can tell you at the time that we implemented that there were probably 20 or so requirements that weren't out of the box that we had to have Krypt build some capabilities that weren't there for FDA kits. I don't know if that's still the case. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the SAP model, but it's a model that allows you to only have to report to a single authority, in this case Great Britain, for the other folks that we ship to outside of Europe. Pretty powerful, makes things simple. This is something that we had in place prior to going in GTS, and it was simple to replicate using GTS. There's a little bit about what, you know, if you guys can see about what the local filings look like with the different statuses on there, and that's one thing that you get out of GTS is kind of a dashboard view of what your filings look like. And again, this is all the power of these dashboards, and to be able to have the visibility to know at what stage your products are in, and where your holds are and where your issues are, is something that we didn't have before. And this is an area where I really want to spend a little bit of time, and I think where I have some expertise is not necessarily into the nuts and bolts in the solution. That's something SAP and GTS can help you with, but there's a lot of work that has to be done on these projects to make certain, from a process perspective and a data perspective, that you can really leverage the power of SAP. So I'd say the major issue, like in any automation, is the fact that you have to have good data and good master data. And if you have multiple instances of ECC that aren't harmonized, or even, you know, some ERPs outside of the SAP world, you definitely need to spend a great deal of time in looking at those issues and cleaning up those issues prior to go live, because again, you're automating transactions, and when you automate transactions, you know, garbage in, garbage out, you need to do a lot of work in regards to making sure that your data is correct and it's harmonized between the systems. And we spent a great deal of time trying to deal with differences between our SAP systems, right? So some of the things that are listed in here are around units of measure and weights. We had problems with part numbers and leading zeros. You name it, any differences between these systems or any data issues and valuations will carry right in through the system, and you don't want to wait till you're in testing and UAT to deal with these issues. You want to get way ahead of master data issues and data cleansing way prior to getting into UAT. Again, you know, and I work in IT, but I consider myself an advocate for the business, right? But at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, and it's human nature, the thought pattern is when you get into these system implementations that they're IT projects, right? But when it gets down to it, the technology and the IT part of the project is a simple part of the project. The more difficult part of the project is on the business side, around business process, around rules, around trying to maintain scope and data, right? And finding the right partner that can marry technology, marry the process, marry the people, you know, is key, right? Where the technology and the power of SAP GTS is there, in order to unleash it, these projects have to be staffed with the right business people that can make decisions and that understand their process and their data. And you have to have the right implementation partner that not only understands SAP as a product, but understand, you know, how to marry what GTS does to the instances of ECC on the SD side and the material master side. And they have to know the business processes and kind of how trade organizations work within companies. The technology itself is there, but things get complicated when you're talking, you know, about people and process. And I think that's kind of where the rubber meets the road on making these projects successful. But it certainly isn't easy. So again, I talked a little bit about the value proposition, and I don't want to underestimate it because I've heard it from the business, right? So I worked with the business prior to having a single view and the view that they have now, both from a reporting perspective. It's invaluable to the business to be able to view their transactions in a dashboard fashion and know what's going on from goods being moved. Now I'm going to move on and let Mike speak about the ACE updates from SAP. Again, pleasure to speak with you guys today.
Great, thanks, Bill, for sharing CareFusion's processes in a GTS environment. Really impressive what your team has done with GTS. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Mike Bundalian, licensed customs broker and product manager for SAP GTS in North America, with specific focus on U.S. imports. I don't really have a lot of slides, but I'd like to give you a brief update on our ACE initiative at SAP. So back in 2008, we certified GTS with ABI, or the Automated Broker Interface, which was an integral part of U.S. Customs Automated Commercial System, so that's ACS. And as most of you already know, U.S. Customs has been developing ACE, or the Automated Commercial Environment, for about a decade now to replace the old clunky ACS system. And actually, as announced by CBP this week, the new go-live date for ACE is now March 31st, 2016. So that's been moved from end of February, and importers and brokers will be required to start filing most of their cargo release and entry summary in ACE by the end of March. So not everything is required to be filed in ACE. Some entry types and some additional functionalities will remain in ACS. But yeah, you can reference the recently published CSMS on the CBP website on the new dates. Additional entry types and features will be rolled in over the summer and through the rest of 2016. So in November 2015, we successfully certified GTS with the ACE system, primarily focused on the entry summary with cargo release. And of course, ACE is an extensive new system full of user-friendly features. Some ABI applications have been improved drastically, so that's the cargo release and the entry summary. Also the entry summary with cargo release. So there's the one-step or the two-step process. So those are the biggest changes in ACE. And of course, they've offered new functionalities, more user-friendly features. Some of the other features have not changed or are yet to be changed. Say, for example, a big change for ACE in the entry summary is the PGA, or the participating government agencies, where the different agencies will have to define their own implementation guide of the CBP published PGA implementation guide. So only a handful have been able to provide their PGA implementation guides, and some are expected to come on board. So at SAP, we're actively reviewing and working on additional ACE functionality to deliver in GTS based on our customers' prioritized requirements. One is the post-summary correction, so PSC. This replaces the manual PEA, or post-entry amendment process. So this is now all electronic, and we actually just released this functionality in GTS via OSS note. So instead of doing a manual process of doing your PEA in the past in ACS, you can do this now electronically in ACE. So like at the header level, you have to identify what are changing, and also at the line item. Of course, there are certain criteria that you have to meet, or the entry declaration has to meet before a PSC can be filed against it. Another new feature is the document image system, or DIS. So the goal of ACE is for everything to be electronic, and DIS, document image system, is a new way of transmitting documents required to CBP. So there are two ways to do this: the email DIS and the EDI DIS. So the plan is for PDF attachments to be electronically submitted from GTS straight to the ACE system. I mentioned earlier the participating government agencies, so about 47 agencies are expected to come on board. For the March 31st deadline, these are the APHIS and the NHTSA. So these two PGAs, and they have to be exclusively. It cannot be paired with another agency. So APHIS by itself, if your entry has APHIS related entries, then you have to file that in ACE. If your entries have DOT or NHTSA related items, then you have to send that to ACE. Otherwise, you will have to go to the old ACS system. And FDA is still going to be in ACS. The implementation for FDA in ACE has been delayed until further notice. But we are currently looking at the entire PGA implementation guide because that's what the trade has to use, and all the participating government agencies will have to abide by CBP's own implementation guide of the PGA and create their own for their agency. So in GTS, what we're currently looking at is a more holistic approach to the PGA in general. So we're not just looking at FDA or DOT or FCC specific implementations, but we're looking at a one approach that can be extended easily to other agencies that will eventually go on ACE. What else? So other features that we're looking at, census warning override. This is another feature that has gone electronic, and we're currently reviewing that. We're also reviewing the ABI queries. There are no major changes to the existing queries from ACS that were transitioned to ACE, but they have introduced new ones, and one example is the entry summary query. We're also looking into that. Our primary focus right now are the DIS and the participating government agencies, and we're looking at the census warning override and the ABI queries. And last but not the least, foreign trade zones. So we certified GTS with FTZ in ACS in the old system still last year. We have a customer that recently completed their proof of concept and is getting ready to do FTC in GTS. And as part of that initiative, and also related to ACE, we are looking at migrating also the FTZ features that will be migrated to ACE. So this has now been scheduled for end of May 28, 2016, for all FTZ-related transmissions. So your 214s, your PTTs will be turned on in ACE at the end of May, and we're working towards that schedule. So yeah, just a brief overview of what we're currently doing in ACE. That's really all I have for ACE Foundation. I think we're ready for questions. Okay, Lynn,
Great,
Bill?
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Bill. Thank you both for presenting. Just wanted to clear something up real quick. I saw a few questions coming in about the slides, the ACE updates. We didn't have a bunch of slides on the ACE updates, but if you do have specific questions or if you're looking for more information, we'd be happy to provide you with more information on these ACE updates as Mike just went over in this webinar. Also, just to let everyone know, we are planning on having a few other importing webinars with SAP GTS, so stay tuned. You can look for some emails, and we'll be sending out invitations to the following webinars. We did record this webinar, and we will send out the slide deck and a link to the recording to everyone who registered for this webinar. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the questions box. I see a few came in, so we'll go ahead and start answering those questions now. And if you do have questions after the webinar, we're showing our contact information here, so feel free to reach out. Okay, so the first question is, this is to CareFusion. How long did it take you to implement using SAP GTS, and how did you build your business case?
Yeah, so good question, right? So from a time frame perspective, end to end, about 15 months overlapping between the start of worldwide exports that went live at about month 8 or 9, right? So 9 months, you know, for Big Bang, all countries on the worldwide export side, and then we went live with U.S. imports about 5 or 6 months later. But I also mentioned that it was overlapping, right? So we were working, we blueprinted them together, right? So it wasn't serial. So about 15 months, from beginning to end. We had the need to go live on exports first because of the service agreement that I talked about. On the import side, those systems, MIC and Eclipse, we owned, so we didn't have the time pressure on that side to meet a TSA date. As far as a business case is concerned, we didn't have to present a business case. I think business cases are a lot easier when you're in a service agreement, right? Because there isn't really a default position of not doing anything, and we already had an automated system. So I think there's a different business case in talking about going from automated with many systems to automated with GTS. Probably what was more critical than our business case with an ROI, which is usually in trade around non-compliance, right? So it's not usually it's not increased revenue. It's what's the cost of not being compliant. But more of our call to action was, in the RFP, what value was having a unified, system bring to us versus having multiple point solutions, both from a cost of ownership perspective on the IT perspective, and from a client perspective, that supply chain visibility that I talked about, and it wasn't a close horse race between looking at GTS for both imports and exports versus having a hybrid solution. And you guys have my contact info, so I don't mind sharing more information as it relates to kind of business case and numbers that were presented at the time. So feel free to contact me, and I can provide some more detailed information.
Okay. Bill, we have another question here for CareFusion. Are your self-filings that include FDA kits compliant with ACE as opposed to ACS? Is FDA fully on board with ACE?
Yeah, so I can't, I don't know that I can answer that question. I can answer it in the way that when we went live, ACE was something that was just talked about, like it was talked about forever, and we didn't, it wasn't in production, right? And I think the decision that Becton Dickinson has made is to use their instance of global trade, which is a broker model. So, that's a good question for Krypt and a good question for Mike in regards to what the going forward proposition looks like for GTS and ACE as it relates to self-filing. But from a business perspective, BD is moving forward with ACE without the self-filing.
And I can address that question as well. So in the ACS ABI certification of GTS, we delivered the FDA, FCC, and DOT interfaces because those are the only 3 ones that were live or integrated with the ABI system. As for ACE, FDA has been in pilot for a couple months now, but they have decided to not go live with it at the end of March. So initially the go live was for the main entry 01, 03, 11, and with some FDA or some PGAs, that includes FDA, APHIS, and DOT NHTSA. They were scheduled to go live at the end of February, but because of the lack of readiness of the trade and also the relative instability in the ACE system, they've decided to push out the date to the end of March for, again, the same entry types that were originally scheduled for February 28th. But now it's just for APHIS and NHTSA for the end of March, and FDA is still going to be via the ACS system using the old ACS CATIR structure, and they have not determined yet when FDA is going to be live on ACE. So that is the latest, and that news came out just this week.
Okay, great. We have another question here. Does CareFusion use an invoice in addition to the ASN and inbound delivery to create an import customs declaration?
You want to go ahead, Ryan?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Bill. So yeah, they do use. They have they do create ASN to get the initial work list, and they use the invoice to do the three-way match. They do use the invoice as well.
Okay. And where does your self-filing department reside in?
Yeah, so we have a global trade presence in the UK. We also have a presence in El Paso.
Okay, great. What is the volume of imports being self-filed, and how many individuals are staffed to self-file? I'm not sure if you know those numbers off the top of your head, or if that's something that we could get back to.
I'll get back on that number. I have those numbers for what had existed back 4 years ago, but my guess is those numbers have changed. So not a problem getting back to you on those numbers.
Okay, great. And let's see, what percentage of the data you submit is automatically populated on the declaration versus manually entered into GTS?
I don't think we don't manually enter anything into GTS. I think the only thing that's manually entered into GTS had to do with the couple locations we had where we weren't sourcing data from SAP. So we had a couple small businesses that were on small ERP systems where we have manual entry, but 90-odd% of our transactions in our businesses run on SAP, and there aren't there is not manual intervention there.
Okay. We have a follow-up to the invoice question. Is the invoice used to create the import customs declaration, not just to match the import deck to the invoice?
Yeah, this is Rajan again. I think if you're looking at just creating so their process is actually they use ASN and then they match with the invoice. Yeah, I think they did have one requirement to create that, but that was again, they went back to just matching with ASN, so no direct invoice using. Yeah, they didn't use that.
Okay. And how long was the testing period for RLF?
I'm not sure I heard that, Kaylee.
Sorry? The question was, how long was the testing period for RLF?
Yeah, we're, again, we're FDA regulated, and our GTS system is validated, right? So We ran through 2 cycles of UAT, right? Each cycle runs through all our scenarios, all our business process scenarios, including that scenario. Those UATs ran 4 weeks with a week in between, so 8 weeks of total elapsed time on testing with a week in between. But again, we run 2 cycles of testing. One reason for that is we run our first cycle not for the record with the FDA, so make sure that we, our business knows how to run, all the tests, fixes any anomalies or data issues, and then we run a second set of tests for the record that are documented. So again, 8 weeks in total run time to run through all the test scripts and the business scenarios for all the imports. The same thing was true on the export side, right? Again, we had 2 cycles of 4-week testing with a week in between.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think you mentioned you had a maquiladora. Which application do you use to manage temporary imports? We thought you were no longer using this.
Yeah, it's Millennium.
Okay. And can you confirm that you are filing prior notice via GTS also?
Yeah, let me do that offline.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think there was one other question here. How is SAP GTS integrating with U.S. single window for imports and exports?
Ryan, you want to tackle that?
So by the time when we implemented it, I guess we had, as you're saying, this is something we had. Obviously, if you look at from a functionality, they are in the same customs management, but we had them separate for at least for CareFusion. But we have some customers who are looking at having a single window, but for CareFusion it was separate. So we did use, I guess, from a work list and all, which is in the same customs management model, but it's a different reporting we are using.
Okay.
I'd also like to chime in on that. So the single window concept is like a very generic concept, right? It's a single window. They have it in the U.S. and for the U.S. market, the single window is ACE. So everything is now being transitioned over to ACE. All the ACS functionalities are moving to ACE. All the also the export AES system is being transitioned into ACE. So that's I don't know what the exact answer they're looking for, but the single window is ACE for the U.S. For the U.S. Customs jurisdiction, and being able to transmit all your documentation, your import and export documentation to ACE, and having your account portal set up in ACE. That's the single window functionality. So if you have additional questions around single window, I'd be happy to address that as well.
We have one more question here, Bill. What was the one key takeaway from going live on GTS? And what was the biggest stumbling block you had to overcome in your implementation?
Yeah, so again, great question, right? So CareFusion as an entity was not a monolithic business organization, probably similar to a lot of your organizations. It's definitely similar to Beck and Dickinson that I work for now, right? So we're talking about, businesses that run independently, right? They have their own processes, they manage their own data, and in fact, when we did the work on export, we had 50-odd commercial documents that all look different, right? That we needed to move into one, and to get different business units agreeing on harmonized process, harmonize data is a difficult task, right? And I can tell you that, you know, global trade, you know, as it existed in CareFusion, reporting through quality, probably wasn't the right entity to take that lead, right? So they more view themselves as not wanting to get in the way of business and drive those business decisions. And IT was kind of put in the middle of a bunch of different discussions that the business had around doing things, right? So I think you need the right project structure, the right business leaders, you know, on your steering committee. And if this is viewed as an IT project or viewed as a compliance project as opposed to a business project where you're trying to enable, you know, the movement of products, you will not be successful, right? It needs to not be viewed as an IT or a compliance project, and you need to have the right project organization with business leaders that can make decisions on requirements, that can make decisions on business process and data. Because anytime you automate anything, any differences in data or process is going to end up causing problems.
Okay,
technology is more simple than process and people and organization.
Okay, we don't have any questions at this time. I will be sending out an email with the presentation deck and the webinar recording, hopefully today. If you do have any questions, we do have our emails provided here. You can reach out to any of us. And thank you so much for everyone for joining and listening in. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, Bill and Mike, also for presenting.
Great. Thanks, Krypt, and thank you to Mike and from SAP.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.